Welcome, everybody, to the Living Your Career show. My name is Roisin Duffy. I'm a director at Blue Sky Careers. We are a recruitment and career advisory agency. Our theme today is all about flexibility. Is flexibility good or bad when you're trying to build a sustainable career? And we're particularly, the backdrop to that is we're in COVID-19 times. We're in uncertain and unpredictable markets. My very special guest today is Julie Lee. And Julie is an advisor to boards and senior management teams. She is definitely an advocate for brand and for reputation, for sustainability, for diversity and inclusion. And Julie Julie has built a very diverse career. She's had a lot of national and international experience. And I think Julie would be the first one to say that her career has been built entirely on a flexible career model. So the career plan went out the door with Julie, the career goals. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I suppose, Julie, firstly, Julie, welcome to the show. And thank you so much for wanting to be my guest today. For everybody's benefits, Julie and I have known each other for a very, very long time. And there is a lot of respect and admiration between the two. So I'm delighted to have you on board.
Thank you for having me. And yes, let's not mention numbers because that just makes me feel old.
I don't think so. You've got a little way to go. Julie, I guess we're always told, and let's start, we must have a career goal. You're finishing uni or you're finishing high school. What's the plan? What are you doing? And so by your own admission, you've never had a career goal. So what's your philosophy for success when it comes to your career?
Yeah, so I did an undergraduate degree in a Bachelor of Arts, which tends to be the degree that people do when they don't know what else they want to do, right? And initially I thought, well, I love history. I'm going to major in history. And then I failed history in my first year. And I think that was probably one of the first signs for me that you can make plans, but you have to be flexible when they don't quite work out. My postgraduate degree was in journalism, which I only did because my father basically said, well, what are you going to do next? How about journalism? And he literally filled out the paperwork for me. But what that led me to was my passion for communications. So I sometimes think, well, first of all, sometimes other people know you better than you know yourself. And it's wise to listen to other people and factor their thoughts in. But secondly, I think, and to kind of kick off with the theme of the day, is just to be flexible if things don't go quite to plan. So, following my education, I did journalism. I thought, great, I'm going to be a journalist, and the jobs would flood in. And of course, as many people starting out in a career soon realise, jobs do not flood in. And I ended up taking a job in Japan teaching English. Nothing to do with journalism, right? But I liked the idea of it. And look, I think that introduced another passion of mine, or dual passion, I guess, which is new cultures, exploring new cultures, understanding new cultures, and travel. And both of those things I have utilised extensively in my career since then. So I came back from Japan, took a job in a call centre. Did I want to be a call centre operator for the rest of my life? No, I did not. But it was a rapidly growing organisation that I could see had opportunity. And sure enough, within 6 weeks, I was moved into the communications and marketing team. And that's really where my proper career kicked off. Since then, there's been a few roles which I've taken that were at first not roles that you would logically think was the next step for me. Going back to when you and I met, I had that role that I started out in the call centre, ended up the general manager for marketing and communications after about 6 years with them. And when it was time to move on, was a bit lost and thought, okay, well, what do I do now? And there are two things that I recall distinctly from our conversation in those early days. One was you strongly recommended I get some well-known brands on my resume. And I think that more than your job titles is probably key, right? If somebody can see that you've worked for brands that they know, that they respect, that they understand, that's probably more useful to them than a job title, which, let's face it, I think we've all probably had some unusual job titles that aren't really reflective of what we did day to day, right?
Well, I think a lot of job titles don't mean a whole pile.
Right.
Um, I wouldn't in any way wish to disregard what titles are important internally or the family of titles. But I never rarely ever ask anybody what their title is. I'm
Mm,
probably much more interested in what they're doing, how they're doing it, and the value that they're bringing to that role. And do
exactly.
you think, talking about your career progression, do you
Mhm.
think COVID-19 has affirmed or made you think otherwise about having a flexible career model? And I say this because if you said to people, if you're out of work and you say to somebody, you need a job, then they're going to say, sure, I'm going to be flexible. But if you're in a job that you don't particularly love and you're not exactly going anywhere quickly, a lot of people might think it's COVID-19, Roisin. Are you mad? You're not happy and you're telling me that I need to move on. Tell us a little bit about where you think flexibility fits into the COVID world.
Okay. Look, I'm not an expert in recruitment. I leave that to specialists like you. But my father was always of the opinion that it's easier to get a job if you have a job, right? So, using your example of you have a job, you're not that happy with it, but it's what it is at the moment, and you're thinking, well, this is probably not a great time to jump. I should just suck it up and stay where I am.
Mm,
But I actually think that what's going on now has reaffirmed my belief that flexibility is a good thing.
mm,
And that is because there companies across the world, but in Australia as well, are downsizing or restructuring or moving people around. And the more flexible you are, the higher the likelihood that they'll keep you on and move you into a different role, right?
mm,
So I've been in my current role only for 2 months. I've been with the organisation for the last 2.5 years, and I've had 4 jobs in that time, and did not apply for all of them. They, happened. But earlier in the year, and this was not strictly due to COVID, although probably mirrors some other people's experience, my role was made redundant. And I think because I had some strong advocates in the business, because I'd built up a reputation, people knew me and they knew that I was flexible. And equally because I knew I wanted to stay with the company if at all possible, I took a sideways step, even a little bit backwards from where I had been in terms of seniority. But it was with a part of the business that I understood well, and it was people that I really enjoyed working with. And
yeah.
there were still opportunities to learn. There always are. And I kind of had in my mind, you know what, this is going to be temporary, and I'm going to wait for the right opportunity to come where I can step back up again. And sure enough, that happened in October. Now, if I'd said, 9 months ago, no, I'm not willing to take that step back or sideways or to do something else, this is not my career path, I'd have left the organisation. And look, I might have found another job that I enjoyed, but I certainly wouldn't be where I am now. And my current role, I have to say, is probably one of the most satisfying I have ever had because
Mm.
of the things I get to be involved with. Um,
So
so
you're after moving into diversity and inclusion. You're after moving into sustainability areas that they were not your passion to start out with, but they're quickly becoming your passion, as well as corporate well-being. My question there is, when you're in an organization, your role's being made redundant, you're being stepped sideways or backwards. There must have been more. There must have been your values were aligned. You knew that the people had regard for you. There was more circumstances that made you plant your feet and wait for a new job to emerge within that organization. You clearly saw there was scope and promise, because if you felt that was it and this job was going to land you there forever, would you have made the same decisions? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, no, good question. And look, this was not the first time I have had a role made redundant. The Many years ago, around the time where mining crash and all of that going on, a role was made redundant. I did seek opportunities with that organisation to move elsewhere, but within Australia, it wasn't an option at the time. So I think. This time, a few years later, lessons learned, understanding better how to get ahead. I definitely reached out to my network, and I
Mm.
think that's probably the longer you work, the more you've been around, understanding the
And I
value
take
of
it,
a network.
Julie, that was as much your internal network as anything, because clearly your desire was to stay if you could. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So sorry, I should be clear. Yes, I'm talking about an internal network here. So people that had influence, people that understood, what the opportunities were across the business and where perhaps there was room for me to move. That advocated for me, for sure. But equally, I made it clear what I was interested in and what I would like to see happen. So I think, anyone else that's listening that's been through a redundancy can probably understand this feeling that at first it's just shock, right? You're just thinking, but I'm good at what I do. I'm a good employee. Why me? Why my role? And you just have to remind yourself it's not about you. So, it's the role. The decision has been made that role is no longer required. And so once you get past that, though, I think it's important to say, okay, so what's next? What are there any other opportunities for me in the organisation? Now, look, ideally the organisation would have taken that into account when they're making these plans, right? And they would have thought, okay, well, Julie's role is no longer existing. Where else can we put her? But sometimes these things happen quite quickly. And also sometimes the people put in charge of making those decisions aren't fully across you or your aspirations or your capabilities. And so you have to advocate for yourself and say, okay, are there any other opportunities for me? I'm willing to explore. It doesn't have to be the exact same role.
I suppose the other thing there too, Julie, is that, it shows the organisation that you're passionate about them, you're committed to them.
Yes.
But there's a question. So when people are too flexible, and we had this conversation when we were doing some of the prep for the show, if you're too flexible, you find yourself the note taker in the meetings. You may be in the senior management group, or you might be, you're senior, but it's how do you advocate for yourself? And particularly, so yes, you want to be flexible. You don't want to be pushy. You don't want to be really sort of, barracking too loudly, because, when these sort of changes occur, and you're wanting sort of prime position, but you don't want to be sort of, where I'm coming from here. You want to be able to advocate, but you don't want to look like you're pressing too hard, because then that comes across as being too pushy and too much pressure. To people out there that are in companies where there is scope for advancement, or they feel like they're being overlooked, what would you say to them about advocating for yourself and the right way to do that?
Okay. So there's kind of two parts for that, because we you kind of started talking about being taken advantage of, and I think that the older I get and the more I've been around, I can spot those circumstances better than I used to, and certainly throughout my career, I'm sure I've done things. Well, I know I've done things that weren't in my job description and were certainly probably not things that I should have been asked to do, but a lot of them helped me build those relationships with people that were then able to offer me and give me other opportunities to grow. So, and look, I'm not saying you should be a manager's runaround just so that they like you and they promote you eventually. But at the same time, there are certain things that I think can benefit the relationship and and help them see that you're reliable, that you're someone that they can rely on. But there are also careful ways that you can push back. So the note taker example, anyone that's listened to other podcasts has probably heard this used, because I know I've heard it used a few times, and it is a really good example, because it's a scut task, right? Nobody likes to be the one that's responsible for that. But, well, not nobody, I'm sure some people enjoy it. But what my experience has been in the past is that, Julie will take the minutes because she's got nice handwriting. So a great way to push back against that, and I have used it since I heard this, is to say, sure, I'll take the minutes today, but how about we rotate them going forward, and each of us take a turn to take the minutes, and that way we're spreading it out between us. And when you come up with a reasonable solution like that, it's hard for everybody in the room to push back against that, right? So so that's kind of how I would suggest dealing with that particular thing. But in terms of advocating for yourself without being pushy, I think you need to be clear that it is not pushy to make sure your manager understands what you want out of your career. Now, you're not going to walk into the room on day one and say, I'm going to be your boss one day, so deal with that. You've got to be careful how you present it. But equally, in the conversations that you have with your manager, and most companies have a formal process, if not an informal one, of providing feedback both ways, from your manager to you and you to your manager. And that should not just be you sitting there listening to your manager telling you what you did well or what you did badly for the last 6 months, right? That is also your opportunity to say, I've really appreciated gaining experience with this. It might not be part of my core role, but one day I'd like it to be. How can I learn more so that I can progress into more of that role? How can you help me? If your manager isn't actively saying, how can I help you, you should be asking them how they can help you. Not all managers are leaders, right? Plenty of people were promoted because they were good with the technical skills, and they may not know how to be a good leader. And so, in those situations, I just think you have to have and it might take some courage, but you have to have the courage to say, this is what I need from you, and this is what I would like out of my career. And the benefit of doing that is that when opportunities come up, people are clear on what your interests are so they can match you to them. So there are some companies, and where I work at the moment, have this, although, it's definitely something we can improve on. But some companies have platforms where you can, kind of like LinkedIn for internal users, right, where you can put up there, here's all my experience and here's what I would like to do. So that when the recruitment team are looking for people, if they want to try and fill a role internally, they can look through and see who's got the experience and who's got the interest in it. So certainly if your company has that, do it. If you haven't filled that out, do it now. But definitely make sure that your leader and potentially even your manager's manager is clear on where you want to go, and don't treat it as being pushy. You need to treat it as being open about what your expectations are, because if you're not clear, nobody else is going to be.
You talked about management there, and yes, some people are good managers, some people need a bit of development, same with leaders. I think we all aspire, but the question is, we need to be self-aware and sometimes hold our hands up and realize we do need a bit of development. I'm curious to understand, in your company, which is a very large and diverse organization, people are working from home. There's more social isolation. Conventional management, you're in the room, you're looking over somebody's shoulder. I guess I'm curious to know, what steps have your company made to perhaps support managers to be better at this remote management? And also, I guess, the second question is, what steps have you yourself put in place in terms of your engagement and your communication personally to maintain that tempo and momentum and quality of work that you're doing so people know it? Because there's always this kind of level of trust. You're working from home. The old style was, if you're in the office and I can see what you're doing, I'm happy. If you're not, I'm not sure. So tell me a little bit about how you and perhaps your colleagues in your company have managed all of that in terms of development and support for people with this distance management.
Yeah, look, I've certainly had a lot of experience with managers who are fans of presenteeism, to give it a title. So, unless you're there, you can't possibly be working. I have also, about 4 roles ago, I worked entirely from home, and that was a model that the first general manager for the company had set up specifically that way. So, I have had the experience of working in a role that was always intended to be a working from home role. So through that, I think I developed how I needed to work. And look, I'm a very, this, Roisin, I'm a chatty person. I like to engage with people. And look, a core part of my role is telling stories. And I can't be telling stories if I'm not hearing the stories in the first place. So from my perspective, it's all about, okay, well, how do I keep those connections? And I don't think there's a company in the country that hasn't experimented with the various platforms for connection, and probably had some epic fails as well.
Yeah.
And, whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever the other platforms, I think Facebook's building one now that's more corporate focused. And we personally use Teams, is, okay, so using Teams to connect with people, that's one way to do it. Outside of the actual strict shutdowns, though, a lot of us have had the opportunity to go into an office from time to time, as needed. And I think for a lot of people, that was probably important to maintain those connections, those face-to-face connections, because it's Teams is great, but it's not the same as being together. So look, a few things here. So not every role and not every company can make working from home work. There are roles that have to be in-person roles, right? So understand that. But from a corporate perspective, like the kind of roles I have, for example, and the very office-based roles, there is no reason, and this year has shown that it is perfectly practical to have a large percentage of your workforce working from home. So there's that. If you, as a manager, have had bad experiences with employees from working from home, I think you probably need to look at whether it was you or them or your organisation's processes and procedures, rather than the concept of working from home in and of itself. I mean, you can't just say, poof, everybody's working from home and it's all going to be perfect, carry on, right? You need to make sure that, are your employees supported? Do they need more or different kind of support to do their job effectively? Particularly if you've got new people starting. I mean, induction during this whole process has been challenging, to say the least. Do you need to arrange regular face-to-face catch-ups where practical and possible, or you use Teams? Do you need to look at your corporate policies and procedures to ensure that they accommodate all of the different elements that working from home throw into the mix? And that's certainly something that my organisation is doing at the moment. So my previous role, the temporary sidestep role I managed a team, and I had 3 females in my team, 2 of whom were single mums. And I think one of the challenges for them in the early days of this was having kids who suddenly thought, woohoo, mum is now my on-tap snack getting and TV and entertainment slave. And explaining to their kids that actually mum is working right now and you need to go and entertain yourself was probably one of the challenges they had in the early days. So for me, as their manager and as someone who didn't have kids and didn't have that challenge, I had to try and put myself in their shoes and think, okay, so how do I make it easier for them to get their job done? How do I make sure that they don't feel guilty every time their kid interrupts them, that they don't feel frustrated or mentally fatigued by the additional responsibilities that they've got during this time? Look, it was as simple as connecting with them as often as possible. We had a catch-up every morning. Well, it didn't always work out that way, but we tried to have a catch-up every morning. And just check in. And it wasn't necessarily a work catch-up, although we could talk about work if we wanted to. It was more how are you going? How's things? And also being flexible with their work hours. So, for a lot of jobs, does it really matter whether they're doing the work between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. or realistically, could they do a chunk of it, at night when their kids are in bed? And these are all things that companies have, it's sad to say, learnt this year, because realistically working from home has been around a long time, but a lot of companies have been forced to learn how to make this work this year. And as I say, I really think that it's become clear that it is eminently doable, but you definitely need your managers to be on board and supportive and trust that their staff are doing their job, even if you can't see them sitting at their desk.
Julie, one of the things I know about you, and I guess it's interesting, you cultivate relationships very well in the workplace. I think you are probably one of the key people that I know that have had your executives take you from one company to another. And I suppose I would regard them as sponsors. I know you've had mentors in your career, but you've certainly had very strong sponsors. My question to you is, for people out there in this market where jobs are in short supply, and if you're in a good company, how do you cultivate that sort of sponsorship? Was flexibility one of the critical factors? So I'm very interested in your thoughts about cultivating sponsors that will continue to lead you down the career path, and one that's challenging, diverse, and stimulating for you.
Yeah, okay. So, look, I live in Sydney now. We moved down here about 3 years ago, and I moved down for a role that I took at the behest of a previous manager who I have so much respect for and so much admiration and trust that he knew what he was doing when he said that was the right role for me. Unfortunately, and this was out of his control, in the end, that role didn't work out. I ended up moving into the role, with the organisation I'm with today. However, Sydney wasn't even on my list. So going back to that whole, not having a career plan, a few years ago, well, probably more than that now, I'd started to talk to my husband about, let's live somewhere else. I was a little bit over Brisbane. I'd lived there for a long time. I was ready to try something different. But
people are going to be horrified that you just said that. I'm thinking of all of our state of origin fans, including me, that said we lost a good woman to New South Wales. But anyway.
Oh dear. Look, yes, I do work for a national company, so I'm still benefiting the state of Queensland.
Very good.
But I wanted to try something different, right? So we'd talked about Melbourne, we'd talked about Vancouver, we'd talked about I've got a lot of connections in the US, particularly in Utah. But as I say, this role came up, and because I had such respect and trust for this particular executive, I said, sure, let's do it. And look, when I first started working with him, actually in a role that you placed me in for a not-for-profit, I think he obviously saw that I was capable of more than I was doing, because there were a few times during that role where opportunities came up to add to my portfolio, and he was always like, yep, Julie will do it, here you go. And, I guess that loops back to your question earlier around, just taking things on. But all of the things that he gave me were advancement opportunities. It wasn't scut work, right? So because he knew that I was flexible and that I, would take these opportunities and run with them, I definitely think that's why he...
So what you're saying is you need to cultivate. You need to cultivate the belief. You need to show that you have the competence. You need to take some of those strides to show that you're confident and that you have the capability. Because it's a little bit like if you don't put your hand up and if you don't tell people, how are they going to know? I've got one final question for you. I've got one final question. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Julie. Yes.
Well, I was just going to say, so just tied to that, putting your hand up, a lot of organisations have... what I don't know what you call it, working parties or kind of volunteer opportunities for things that happen, the things that get done that don't belong to a specific role, but they want to do this, and it could be as basic as the end of year Christmas party. But where I am now, one of the areas that we do this in is in the sustainability space, and I very early on put my hand up for that because it was something that I was developing a strong passion for. And to your point about making sure that people know who you are and what you're passionate about, through volunteering for that working party, I got exposure to senior people in the organisation that I wouldn't otherwise have been exposed to. And again, I think that certainly helped with my sideways move and also to lock in the role that I have at the moment. So, yes, I was just going to say, it's not just about sticking your hand up for extra jobs to add to your role, but what are those other kind of opportunities in the organisation that will help give you exposure, but that can be more about your passion and the things that you enjoy doing.
And back yourself. I have one final question, then I have to wrap up. Quick question. A tip for anybody out there around flexibility. It's COVID-19. A lot of people are out of work. A lot of people, their employment is at risk. One quick statement on flexibility and its benefits to you now.
I think you need to be flexible both in what kind of roles you're applying for, whether they're short-term, long-term, contract roles, fixed-term, permanent, and also how you find those roles. So don't just rely on job boards online, whether it's Seek or LinkedIn or wherever. One piece of advice I would strongly suggest is find yourself a recruiter that you trust, that you can work with, because having found you all those years ago, Roisin, made the world of difference to my career, because they can help you understand better what you could be doing and what your strengths are, and they know the industry, so they know where the opportunities are. So so that would probably be my final bit of advice, is find someone you trust that can help you through this.
Julie Lee, it's always lovely to talk to you. We do talk occasionally on the phone. The fact that I don't see you is a sadness for me, but hello, we're doing it today. To everybody else who's out there and who's listening to this show, the show airs every Tuesday, every Thursday, 12 noon. We have wonderful people like Julie as guests. Next week, we've got 2 more wonderful guests lined up that will be covering other topics. If you have areas that interest you that you want us to talk about, tell us. We'll cover them. And I guess for now, for myself and Julie, goodbye. But also go out there and learn. Go out there and live, and go out there and love your career. And this podcast is to help you. And so we want to thank you for your time. Tune in and spend some time with us. And as I say, give us some comments if you want to, and we'll certainly act on those. All the best for now, everybody. Thank you.